can you just restate what the qualities are that you see in people that are compatible with demons? Just like to remember to avoid these things. What are they?
Well, it's basically people that, and this is actually some of the secondary signs of possession. It's people who have a tendency towards mendacity,
lying.
Lying all the time, duplicitous. I've made this comment even publicly about certain politicians. You can tell that these people are in cahoots with the devil because of the fact that every single thing they do maximizes damage within their capacity to do so. You get around yeah, you do. You get around people that are like that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I know them.
Even though they might have a veneer of respectability, they're in a position of authority, and they kind of conduct themselves a certain way. Everything they do. I first noticed
they
this.
don't show any, like in normal, I lie. I have lied. I hate lying, but I have done it. But when I do it, or I think most people, when they lie, you kind of twitch a little bit. You don't want to lie.
Yeah.
It's the people who register no concern at all about
That's
lying.
right. No
that
remorse.
is a sign.
Yes.
Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's that psychological compatibility. Or people that are willing to just sacrifice other people for the sake of them getting even some of the most modest of gains, where and so the demons will they'll be happy to kill a bunch of unborn children in order to empower themselves in relationship to, say one particular politician or another. They're more than happy to do so.
Wow.
The other third sign of preternatural signs. So one is things that are beyond human capacity, which I mentioned, speaking foreign languages, but the other one is occult knowledge. And that's in two forms. So I mentioned it earlier, we mentioned it a little bit earlier about this woman who was making theological distinctions. The demon was making theological distinctions. This is a form of knowledge that this woman didn't have. But the other form of occult knowledge is they can know what's going on in the other room. Because as I mentioned, it's all being infused in them as it happens, as it occurs. Because that's how they're designed to know things. That's how God made them to know things. He just infuses them as it happens. So they'll actually know like what you ate for breakfast this morning, or they'll know things about your past history. One of the things that you'll see from time to time is that they actually know your sinful history. And so if you go into a session, and because we see this from time to time, if one of our assistants has that there's some sin that they haven't confessed, then what happens is the demon knows that, and because as far as the demon is concerned, is if you don't confess your sins, then basically their attitude is, well, then I still have power over you. Because you're still under me. It's once you confess your sin,
true.
Then it's absolved, and then boom. And so as a result of that, they know that. And so you'll start the session, and all the demons will point out, hey, this guy over here, he did X, Y, Z this morning. And this person didn't even see that guy until the session started. So they'll have occult knowledge on those particular kinds of things. And so those are kind of the indicators that, like, okay, I'm not dealing with somebody who's, that this isn't a psychological issue, this is natural. Now, one of the things that people often ask is, well, what about levitation? Is that a preternatural sign? Yes and no. Because there has been cases of like there was a saint in the Catholic Church who would actually levitate when he'd said mass, right? And so and he was a very saintly man. They even did exorcisms over things. Maybe the guy's possessed and nothing, So
well, the Pharisees accused Jesus of being possessed.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And then, but then you can also have levitation occur in an infested building, which is not too common. So people will be in bed and all of a sudden, boom, they feel themselves getting dragged out or pulled up or lifted up off their bed and that type of thing. People have seen that. That's very rare, but as exorcists, we hear about that from time to time. And so that doesn't necessarily mean the person's possessed. Plus, all the people that are possessed, not everybody levitates when they're possessed. Some do, some don't. And so levitation is just not that common, but you see it from time to time. And so it's not a necessary sign that the person's possessed. But if you see a bunch of secondary signs, around the person, and you're dealing with them, and then you start praying over them, and then the demon morphs or changes shape and levitates, well, then okay, that's something that's preternatural.
There's a scene in the Gospels in Mark where a man brings his demon-possessed boy who's hurting himself, throwing himself into fires, having seizures, and the apostles are unable to exorcise the demon. And Jesus walks up and kind of scolds them and then does so, and they say, why were you able to do it and we weren't? And he says, because this kind of demon can only be exercise through prayer and fasting.
Fasting.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that how you get a demon out of somebody varies. So Christ said, by my name you will cast out demons. What he did not say is, by my name you will cast out all demons. And the way we know that is precisely this scene in the Gospels where they were using his name, but it wasn't having the effect. And so they actually have to do prayer and fasting. And basically what that means is the prayer is to petition God enough, intercessory prayer, praying to him, asking him to do enough prayers so that the person will actually be liberated. This is one of the reasons why we actually have people praying, like the assistants during the sessions and outside of sessions. We have people that will spend hours praying for the person's liberation so that we get that done. The other part is through fasting. Now, the fasting goes back to St. Paul, where St. Paul says, bring your body under subjection, right? So you have to fast in order to get your lower faculties under control to some degree. And by doing that, it's a meritorious work which God will actually, and you can offer that so that this person will actually become liberated in the process. The other reason is an exorcist, so I fast 6 days a week when I'm in session. And the reason for that...
What does that mean?
It means having one moderate meal in the evening. That's it, each day. So I have nothing for breakfast, nothing for lunch, and then I have a moderate meal at night. And I do that for 6 days. And part of that is just to, because when we become, when we get our body under subjection, two things occur. One, demons don't want to get involved with you, because if they attack you and try and suggest something to you that's contrary to that subjection, you're going to reject it outright. So they're going to get defeated very easily. And you're going to be, and by that, you're also developing virtue. So you're empowered to be able to kick them out much more easily. When we're weak, they can take advantage of us. But the other part about it is that, and you've probably noticed this even with yourself, is you start to grow in virtue and you start saying, I got to get this part of my life straightened out. You become much more sensitive in that area that you've cleaned up. So, for example, people who stop using profanity all of a sudden in vulgarities, all of a sudden when they hear it, it jars them, right? Well, it's the same thing in relationship to demons. So as you fast, if the demons attack you, you're much more sensitive to it, and so that disorder, because you've got it under your body's now rightly ordered, and so as a result, you quickly detect them, and then so they don't want to attack you. So in addition to they don't want to attack you, but also you have a certain amount of protection, but also you can offer that fasting up so that this person is actually liberated. The people that are possessed sometimes will also need to fast, given sometimes the nature of the demon that they're dealing with. They need to fast in order to break the possession.
The first time I encountered an infested house, I did not see a ghost. I did not hear knocking or find objects moved. What I found was a family, a young couple with 3 children, faithful mass goers, rosary praying, doing everything right in a state of progressive interior disintegration that none of them could explain. Stay with me, all of it. This is not a curiosity exercise. This is information I've spent 30 years gathering at considerable personal cost, and I am telling you now because someone in the house where you are listening to me may need it before the week is out. And subscribe, because what I am going to lay out for you in the next 30 minutes most priests will not say from a pulpit, and someone has to say it clearly. My name is Chad Ripperger. I am a Catholic priest, a Thomistic philosopher, and one of the very few formally trained exorcists still operating in the Western world. I did not choose this ministry. I have said that before, and I mean it the same way every time. I entered seminary in the mid-1980s with the intention of becoming a philosopher theologian. I wanted to teach Aquinas. I wanted to spend my career in the clean air of metaphysics, the nature of being, the nature of the soul, the nature of God's relationship to a created order that He sustains in existence from one instant to the next. That was the plan. What I discovered in seminary and then in the parish life that followed ordination was that there was a population of people quietly desperate, usually dismissed, often medicated into silence, who were experiencing phenomena that no psychiatric framework I had encountered was adequate to explain. Not because psychiatry is illegitimate. Psychiatry is legitimate within its proper domain. The soul has appetites. The brain is an organ. Disorders of both are real, and they can look similar from the outside. The problem is not that psychiatry exists. The problem is that for roughly 50 years, from the late 1960s through the 1990s, the theological category of genuine demonic activity was effectively removed from the formation of most Western priests. They were trained to refer out, to defer to the medical model, to treat claims of supernatural attack as symptoms requiring management rather than realities requiring a specifically priestly response. I have spent the better part of 2 decades cleaning up the pastoral wreckage of that error. When I took up the ministry formally, the first thing I had to do was become precise. Aquinas Part 1 of the Summa Theologiae, questions 50 through 64, the treatise on angels gives us the intellectual foundation for everything the exorcist does. Fallen angels retain their angelic intelligence. Their nature is not destroyed by their rebellion. What is destroyed is their orientation toward the good, their charity, their capacity for the kind of love that is ordered toward another's true flourishing. What remains is an intellect of extraordinary power processing capacity, pattern recognition, millennia of observation of human behavior ordered now entirely toward destruction. That is what I am dealing with when I enter a case. Not a confused spirit, not residual energy, not a projection of trauma, an entity of ancient intelligence with a singular objective. Now, the subject of this confession from the archive is objects. Specifically, what objects you keep in your home, what spiritual significance they carry, and what I have documented in case after case across 30 years happens to a household that unknowingly or knowingly houses material that functions as a point of demonic attachment. I want to name what I am claiming precisely, because precision matters here. I am not claiming that every unusual object in a home summons a demon. I am not telling you to tear apart your grandmother's attic in a panic. I am not asking you to become superstitious in the negative sense, interpreting every broken appliance or illness in your family as evidence of spiritual attack. Most suffering has natural explanations. Most illness is organic. Most family conflict is the ordinary product of fallen human nature operating without sufficient grace, and the remedy is the sacraments, not an exorcism. The demonic is real, its operation is documented, the church has theological categories for it, and the people who dismiss it entirely are not protecting you. They are leaving you without the vocabulary to recognize what you may be dealing with. What you do with what I tell you is your decision before God. That said, there is a category of object, not metaphorically, but literally, physically, that functions as a point of attachment for the demonic. The church has known this for 2,000 years. The Roman ritual of exorcism codified in 1614 under Pope Paul V contains specific prayers for the exorcism of places and objects, precisely because the tradition recognized that the demonic can attach itself to matter. St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that demons operate through influence on secondary causes. They cannot create substance. They cannot override the intellect directly, but they can work through the material world in ways that produce real effects. This is not folklore. This is Catholic theology. I will describe the family I mentioned at the beginning of this confession. I will not give details that identify them. I will describe composite elements, patterns I have observed across multiple cases, without naming individuals or locations, but I will not soften what I describe. You need the truth, not a comfortable abstraction. The husband was a man in his early 40s, professional, careful, practical. His wife was similarly grounded. Their children were 8, 11, and 14. They had moved into the home roughly 18 months before I was called. In the first year, nothing dramatic. A sense of heaviness in the lower level of the house, interrupted sleep, the children reporting unease in specific rooms. The 14-year-old began having episodes at night that his parents initially attributed to adolescent anxiety. The parents' relationship, by their own account solid for over a decade, began to deteriorate in ways neither of them could trace to a specific cause. Arguments with no real content, coldness, mutual suspicion without any identifiable reason. The father began missing Mass in the mornings, not from any deliberate decision, but from what he described as a progressive heaviness that made it impossible to rise on time. The The wife began to feel that prayer, specifically the rosary she had prayed since childhood, was useless. Not that she doubted the faith intellectually. She doubted whether anything she did spiritually was capable of reaching anyone. This is a pattern I have observed in cases of object infestation. Not the dramatic phenomena, levitation, voices, physical contortion, but this gradual erosion of everything that constitutes the spiritual life of a household, the sacraments becoming burdensome. Marital unity fracturing without external cause, prayer feeling inert. The children, whose natural receptivity to the spiritual is not yet filtered through years of rationalist conditioning, registering the disturbance first, the adults dismissing what the children report. When I visited the home, I walked through it with a ciborium containing a single consecrated host, sealed in a pyx, concealed in my coat pocket. I do this routinely. The demonic does not react to an object's external appearance. It reacts to the real presence of Jesus Christ within the Eucharist, because what it responds to is not matter, but the divine person contained within the matter. By the time I reached the basement, there was an involuntary physical reaction in me, not fear exactly, but what I can only describe as the heightened alertness that comes when something ancient and hostile is very close. In the corner of the basement, on a shelf with other items that had accumulated from a previous occupant, was a wooden board. The family did not recognize its significance. It had been there when they moved in. It was a Ouija board, not the Parker Brothers mass market version sold in toy stores, though I want to address that product as well. This was older, handmade, the kind of object that someone had made with specific intent. Beside it, wrapped in cloth, were a set of tarot cards, also from the previous occupant, also old. The family had not used either object. They had simply never cleared the shelf. They did not know what they were housing. I am going to address this theologically now, and I want you to stay with me, because this is where the tradition becomes precise in ways that are pastorally essential. What is the church's teaching on these objects? Not the popular culture interpretation, not the horror movie version, the actual theological teaching. St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologiae, Part 2.2. Questions 95 through 96 addresses divination seeking hidden knowledge or future events through means other than God. He classifies it as a form of the sin of superstition that involves explicitly or implicitly the involvement of demonic agency. The Church's understanding, which Aquinas synthesizes from Scripture and the Fathers, is that divination by its nature constitutes an implicit or explicit pact, a structured interaction with entities other than God. The first letter of Peter, chapter 5, verse 8, says it plainly. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. The Greek verb used there, peripete, means a deliberate, purposeful walking, not random menace. Systematic search for the vulnerable. The Curé d'Ars, St. John Vianney, who served the parish of Ars from 1818 until his death on the 4th of August, 1859, documented his encounters with what he called le grappin the hook, the grabber, across 41 years of priestly service. He did not experience these attacks in dramatic exorcism sessions. He experienced them in his bedroom at night. Physical attacks, physical sounds, supernatural interference with his sleep and his ministry. A man who had destroyed the local dance halls and cleaned up a parish in spiritual ruin was apparently a significant enough threat that the enemy visited him regularly for 4 decades. Saint. John Vianney did not treat this as evidence of a disordered imagination. He treated it as an occupational reality of serious priestly ministry and pressed forward. Padre Pio Francesco Forgione, born in 1887, who received the stigmata on the 20th of September 1918 at the Capuchin Friary of San Giovanni Rotondo, documented physical attacks by demonic forces throughout his ministry, not symbolic encounters, physical beatings witnessed by other friars. The Church, which does not confirm these things casually, has canonized him and recognized the authenticity of his ministry. These are not legends. These are documented facts in the cause for his canonization. The teaching of the Church from Aquinas through the modern era is that the demonic can attach itself to objects. This is not the same as animism, the primitive religious belief that objects contain spirits. This is the theologically precise teaching that a demon can use a place or an object as a point of habitual presence because of a specific action, usually an act of divination, a blood covenant, a deliberate ritual that was performed in relation to that object. The object is not itself supernatural. The demon is not inside the object the way a soul is in a body. The object functions as a legal point of access, a location to which the entity maintains a right of habitual presence because of the specific act with which it was associated. A Ouija board is not a piece of cardboard. It is an instrument specifically constructed for the act of seeking contact with the dead or with non-human entities, which is to say, from the church's perspective, an instrument specifically constructed for an implicit act of demonic consultation. It does not matter whether the person using it believed it was a toy. It does not matter whether they believed anything was happening. What matters is the nature of the act being performed, and the nature of the act is theologically a formal invitation. Tarot cards carry a similar weight, though the tradition distinguishes between their various uses. The cards themselves, as physical objects, have a history. Their use in divination, seeking hidden knowledge about the future, or the hidden through the cards as medium, constitutes, in the church's framework, the same category of act, a formal or informal seeking of knowledge from a source other than God. I want to be clear about something that I think is poorly understood, even in Catholic circles. The person using these objects does not need to believe in their efficacy for the act to constitute a legal foothold. This confuses people. They say, I used a Ouija board at a sleepover when I was 15, and I did not believe in anything, so nothing could have happened. The theology does not agree. The act matters independent of the subjective belief of the actor. A person who walks into traffic while looking at their phone and believing themselves safe is still struck by the car. The metaphysical reality of what is happening does not depend on the participant's belief about it. Nor does the object need to be antique or dramatic. I've encountered cases where the entry point was a mass market product purchased at a major retail chain. I have encountered cases where the entry point was a set of runestones given as a birthday gift by someone who thought they were decorative. I have encountered cases where the entry point was a yoga mat, not because physical exercise is demonic, it is not, but because the mat had been used in sessions that were explicitly oriented toward invoking a specific Hindu deity by name, in which the spiritual content was not merely cultural borrowing, but active religious invocation of entities that the Christian tradition classifies as demonic. I have encountered cases involving crystals specifically acquired for and used in New Age rituals whose stated purpose was summoning spiritual guides or opening channels to non-human intelligences. And I have encountered cases involving statues and idols brought back from overseas travel objects that were not merely artistic souvenirs, but items taken from active cultic use, from shrines where worship of non-Christian entities was and is actively practiced. Most of the people in these cases were not bad people. Not one of them was a Satanist. Not one of them had intended to open anything. They had simply not been formed with the theological precision to understand what they were doing, because the catechesis that would have given them that precision was systematically gutted from Catholic formation over a period of decades. And the void was filled by a culture that treats spiritual experimentation as wellness. Back to the family. When I explained what I had found, the husband's first response was the response I encounter most frequently in practical people: skepticism. He was not hostile. He was a reasonable man, and he listened, but his trained instinct was to find a natural explanation. I gave him the one I always give. Let us remove the objects, perform the proper blessing of the house, and see whether the phenomena resolve. If they do not, I will be the first to acknowledge that I may have been wrong about the connection. If they do, you will have your answer. That is the only empirical test available to us. The objects were removed and sacramentally disposed of, burned with the proper prayers outside the home. The home was blessed from the foundation to the attic with exorcised salt, exorcised holy water, blessed oil on the door frames, a crucifix installed at the center of the main level, an image of Our Lady installed in the common area. The rosary was prayed as a family in the home that same evening. with the family formally renouncing any and all occult attachment and formally consecrating the home to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary. Within a week, the heaviness the wife had described lifted. Within 3 weeks, the husband's difficulty rising for Mass had resolved entirely. The 14-year-old's night disturbances ceased. By the time I followed up with the family 2 months later, their account was consistent. It was as if something that had been pressing down on the household from the inside out had simply been removed. I tell you this not to suggest that every family problem resolves through a house blessing. I have been in ministry long enough to know that the human will, original sin, ordinary suffering, organic illness, and the full range of natural causes produce more than enough difficulty in family life without any demonic component. But I also know what a disordered household looks like when the source is supernatural, and I know what happens when that source is properly addressed. Now, I want to go further. Because the objects I have described, Ouija boards, tarot, New Age ritual items, are the obvious ones. The ones most Catholics would remove without much argument if they were told to. What I want to address now are the less obvious categories, because these are where I find the most persistent resistance. The first is ancestral material. I have encountered cases where the infested object was a piece of furniture, a piece of jewelry, or a document that had belonged to an ancestor who was a Freemason, a practitioner of folk magic, or a member of an occult lodge. Freemasonry, depending on the rite and the degree, involves initiation rituals that constitute, in the Church's formal assessment, the Church has condemned Freemasonry repeatedly, most recently reaffirmed in 1983 under Pope John Paul II, an explicit act of covenantal relationship with a framework that excludes the Lordship of Christ. The initiation ceremonies, particularly at the higher degrees of certain rites, involve symbolic deaths, symbolic rebirths, and oaths that bind the initiate in ways the Church considers spiritually significant. When a grandfather was a third-degree Mason and the family still keeps the lodge ring in the jewelry box or the apron in the trunk in the attic, that object carries a covenantal weight that can function as a point of generational attachment. I am not saying the grandfather is damned. I am not saying the family is possessed. I am saying that in my experience across decades of practice, objects associated with explicit covenantal acts of this nature are not spiritually neutral, and their presence in a household can constitute a legal invitation. The second less obvious category is media. I want to be careful here because I do not want to become a Catholic version of the moral panic industry. Not every horror film is an invitation to the demonic. Not every dark piece of music opens a door. The human imagination engages darkness as a way of processing it, and the great literature of the Christian West is full of darkness. Dante's Inferno, the Psalms, the Book of Job. That is not what I am addressing. What I am addressing is a specific category of media that is not dark in the literary sense, but occult in the technical sense, that is produced with the stated or documented intent to function as an actual vehicle for occult content. There's a genre of music that has documented liturgical roots in satanic or explicitly demonic ritual, where the artist has publicly stated that the music is intended as an invocation, a summoning, or a form of dark spiritual practice. I am not going to name artists. I am telling you that the category exists, that it is documentable, and that in several cases I have worked. The consistent playing of this material in a home was identified by the subject themselves as the point at which their spiritual deterioration accelerated. The third, less obvious category is pornographic material. I include this in the discussion of objects because in the contemporary household, it is not typically a physical object, but a form of habitual engagement with digital material that has the same spiritual function as a covenantal act. I have taught for years, based on the theology of the body and the theology of the soul's spiritual faculties, that habitual grave sexual sin, particularly in the form of regular pornography, thins the spiritual protection of the person in a way that is documented in case after case. The demonic exploits the sacred specifically because of its sacred character. Human sexuality, properly ordered, is a participation in the creative and unitive love of God. When it is consistently disordered in a habitual, unconfessed state, the soul's spiritual capacity is progressively impaired. Not because God abandons the person, he never does that, but because the person has, through repeated acts of the will, created an interior landscape that is hospitable to what God is not. I am not telling you that every Catholic who has struggled with pornography is demonically oppressed. I am not asking you to interpret your own life through a paranoid lens. I am telling you the pattern is documented, that the Church has a mechanism specifically designed to address it, to the sacrament of confession, and that the sacrament is not optional if you want the protection, it confers. The 4 doors, this is the framework I teach, anchored in the tradition, verified across 30 years of cases. The first is occult contact, any act that constitutes seeking knowledge, power, or contact with non-human entities outside the framework God has established through his Church. The second is habitual grave sexual sin, particularly in its disordered and unconfessed states. The third is deep unforgiveness, held as a deliberate act of will when a person chooses not to forgive as an act of defiance, not merely as a struggle. They create a legal foothold by holding themselves in a state of active spiritual self-impairment. The fourth is generational covenants, acts of explicit spiritual covenant by ancestors that have not been formally renounced and broken under proper priestly authority. These 4 doors account for the majority of the infestations I have encountered. Most of them were opened not by wicked people, but by uninstructed ones. By people who had never been told that the spiritual world is not neutral, that acts of the will have consequences that persist beyond the moment of the act, and that the Church exists in part to give us the instruments to close what has been opened. Now, I need to tell you why this situation is worse in 2026 than it was at any point in my ministry, because the acceleration I am observing is not random. The Second Vatican Council opened on the 11th of October 1962 and closed on the 8th of December 1965. It was not a bad council. I want to be theologically careful here. An ecumenical council of the Catholic Church is a legitimate exercise of the Church's magisterial authority, and I am not among those who reject its authority. What I am addressing is the implementation, the hermeneutic, as Pope Benedict XVI described it, and specifically the pastoral response to the council that in many dioceses across the Western world produced a collapse of the catechetical infrastructure that had protected ordinary Catholic families for generations. What was that infrastructure? Real presence catechesis, the consistent, clear teaching that what is received in Holy Communion is not a symbol, not a memorial meal, not a community gathering around shared values, but the literal body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. The real presence is not a devotional option. It is the central mystery of Catholic worship. A Pew Research survey that has been public for several years found that a majority of self-identified American Catholics do not believe it. That is not a survey of lapsed Catholics. That is a survey of people who identify as Catholic and still attend Mass, among whom the majority do not hold the central teaching of the faith they are nominally practicing. I cannot overstate the pastoral consequence of that data. A Catholic who does not believe in the real presence is a Catholic who has been deprived through the failure of catechesis, of the most powerful protective reality in the created order. Seminary formation through the 1970s, 1980s, and into the 1990s, in many Western institutions treated the demonic as metaphor. I have spoken with priests my own age and older who were explicitly told in formation that reports of possession were evidence of psychological disturbance and that the appropriate response was referral, not the rite. The Roman ritual of exorcism was treated in many formation programs as a relic of pre-scientific thinking. The 1999 revised rite of exorcism, which many bishops barely permit their priests to request permission to use, requires in its current form a significant bureaucratic process before a full, solemn exorcism can be authorized. I am not attacking the current rite. I am noting that the barriers to accessing the Church's most powerful public prayer on behalf of a possessed or severely oppressed individual have increased at precisely the moment when the need for that prayer has also increased. The collapse of sacramental confession, weekly or monthly confession, for serious Catholics was standard through the mid-20th century, has removed a regular mechanism of grace that served as a kind of spiritual maintenance. When the soul's defenses are regularly renewed through the sacrament of penance, the legal footholds available to the demonic are regularly cut. When confession becomes a once-a-year Easter duty, or something people do when they feel like they need it, which in a culture of therapeutic self-forgiveness and moral relativism becomes effectively never, the accumulation of unconfessed grave sin over years and decades creates a very different spiritual landscape than the one the church was designed to inhabit. The attack on the family, no-fault divorce since California in 1969, the normalization of contraception, the redefinition of marriage, the progressive targeting of children through both the educational system and the entertainment complex has systematically dismantled the natural unit of human spiritual protection. The family, properly formed, is not merely a social unit. It is an ecclesia domestica, a domestic church. The home is, in Catholic teaching, consecrated space when it is properly ordered with the cross on the wall, the holy water at the door, the rosary prayed together, the father exercising his priestly role over his household. When the family is dismantled, when fathers are absent or passive, when mothers are spiritually isolated, when children are formed primarily by screens rather than by the community of the church, the spiritual protection that the family structure itself provides is dismantled with it. I am not telling you that every failure in every family is a demonic plot. I am telling you the pattern is coherent, sustained, and historically unprecedented in its simultaneity, and that a specifically priestly response is inadequate without a corresponding renewal of the family structure within which the sacraments operate. What do? I am going to tell you exactly, because this is the section that matters. Go to confession this week, not next month, not when you feel ready, this week. Bring grave sin. If you have not been in a year or more, bring what you remember. Bring your honest accounting of the state of your soul before God, and receive the absolution that Jesus Christ gave the apostles authority to pronounce on the evening of his resurrection, standing in the locked room where they hid, breathing on them and saying, John 20, verse 23, whose sins you forgive, they are forgiven them. Whose sins you retain, they are retained. That is not a historical text. That is
Fr. Chad Ripperger's voice lingers in the silence. Let this final reflection serve not as an ending, but as a decisive beginning for your life and your household. You have now heard the truth spoken with 30 years of hard-won authority. Demonic influence is not Hollywood spectacle. It is often quiet, gradual, and deeply personal. The slow erosion of peace, prayer, marital unity, and the spiritual vitality of your children. The enemy does not need dramatic entrances when a seemingly harmless object left on a basement shelf can serve as an open door. The central message is clear. Your home is a domestic church. What you allow inside its walls carries spiritual weight. Objects used for divination, Ouija boards, especially handmade ones charged with intent, tarot cards, occult jewelry, pagan idols, or materials explicitly tied to spiritism, are not neutral. According to the consistent teaching of the Church and the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas, they can function as points of attachment. The demonic cannot create, but it can latch onto matter that has been consecrated to its purposes through human sin or occult practice. Yet this knowledge is not meant to produce fear. Perfect love casts out fear. The same tradition that warns us also arms us with overwhelming power. Here is your practical action plan, what you must do now. First, conduct a holy audit of your home. Walk through every room prayerfully. Look for anything associated with the occult, New Age spirituality, divination, witchcraft, astrology used for fortune-telling, or books and objects that glorify demonic themes. If in doubt, remove it. When in serious doubt, have a priest bless the object or perform a simple exorcism of the item. Second, dispose of dangerous objects correctly. Do not sell them. Do not give them away. Destroy them safely if possible and dispose of the remains. Then have your entire home blessed. Third, fortify your domestic church daily. Return to or deepen the family rosary. Attend Mass together as often as possible. Maintain a strong sacramental life with regular confession. Enthrone the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary in your home. Pray the Saint Michael prayer and the prayer to Saint Joseph every day. Teach your children the power of sacramentals and the reality of spiritual warfare. Most suffering has natural causes. Do not become paranoid. But when you see persistent, unexplained patterns, sudden hatred between spouses who once loved deeply, children tormented by nightmares, or a choking spiritual heaviness that makes prayer feel impossible, do not hesitate to seek help from a solid, traditionally formed priest. The good news is this: God has already won. The devil is a defeated enemy whose only remaining power is what we foolishly grant him through ignorance or disobedience. By closing every known door and living in a state of grace, you render your home almost impenetrable to his influence. Your home can become a lighthouse of grace in a darkening world. Your marriage can be healed. Your children can grow up protected and on fire with authentic faith. This is not superstition. It is Catholic realism, rooted in 2,000 years of lived experience and divine revelation. As you finish this video, make the sign of the cross and speak these words aloud. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, I place my home, my family, and myself under your precious blood. Mary, Mother of God, crush the serpent's head in our midst. Sanctuary, Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. All holy angels and saints pray for us. Amen. Then begin the audit. Begin the purification. Begin the renewal. The battle is real, but the victory is already yours in Christ. Guard the doors, live in the light, and never underestimate the power of a faithful Catholic home. May the peace of Christ reign in your hearts and in your households now and forever.
27 demons and one human?
Yeah.
What was the one in modern history?
The Mormons. It's a modified form of Freemasonry anyway.
How many demons are there?
Billions, literally.
Can a demon possess multiple people at one time?
Yeah, so all the gods of the Gentiles are demons.
What's
Like I
the
said,
most you've seen?
Well, I said this one had Legion, and I believe it was Legion. But outside that context, the one that I've seen the most is 27.
27 demons and one human?
Yeah. And it was a pretty sad case. This guy was a hurting unit, man, from all that. So most of them, though, it's somewhere between 1 to 8, maybe, are the most that you tend to see as a general rule. I actually did see a case where I did one case where I got rid of one demon of fear. The woman went out and did something really stupid, and then when she came back, it was literally like scripture: 1 leaves and 7 come back, and that was literally, she had 7. So, so the number of possessors, the names, because once you know the name, there's 2 aspects to the name. One, it gives you an identity. So, for example, when I had Loki in a case, once the demon revealed what his name was, then I was able to actually go and research historically Loki as a Norse god, because it says right in scripture, all the gods of Gentiles are demons, and so you can actually just go and look at the worship that they used to give to Loki in the past, and to the Norse god of Loki. And what you'll find out in there is almost a complete description of his personality. He's a god of mischief, and so he was just such a handle to get a hold of. But once you know the name, then you can do some research, or you can ask other exorcists, have you seen this guy, etc. The second thing is the name gives you a power over them. Now, demons will either reveal their name right off the bat if it's not going to help, if it's not going to be mean that much. Or they'll hold out as long as they possibly can, because once you know their name, then it gives you a certain power over them. We actually experience this as human beings. So if I call your name, hey, Sean, if you're standing over there and I say, hey, Sean, right? When it goes into your faculties and you hear it, it draws your attention. Well, it's the same thing with them. When you're using their name, it draws their attention, and they can't get their mind off of the thing that you're telling them to do. And so it gives you a power actually over them. So the names, how they got in, because a lot of times how they got in is how they're going to get out. Plus, times how they got in is very often, like if it's because they were wounded very badly, like a woman was raped or something of that sort, then you may be some psychological issues that have to be addressed first before she's going to get liberated. And then the time and date of departure when you're leaving. I don't ask that too often because they usually lie. Now, only about 10% of the time do they actually tell the truth, but they usually lie. They'll say, oh, I'm leaving tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and goes and they don't leave. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to discourage the person who's possessed. And then the last piece of information is, what is it going to take to get you out? And usually it's something very simple. So in the last case that the woman was liberated that I was working with, it took us a long time to get out this piece of information. She had to go to a specific altar in a particular church, and I had to say a specific prayer over her, and she would leave, and he would leave. We did it, boom, he was out. But it took us a long time to get him to that point. That piece of information is what they're going to hold out. And there's 6 stages of liberation. Stage 6 is liberation. Stage 5, that last piece of information is going to come out in stage 5.
Wow. When you're talking about curses, does this play into this as well, curses? Can you ask who the curse came from?
Yes. Well, they'll often reveal it. So if the person's possessed, you'll actually, if they're not possessed, the demons can't talk necessarily. Whereas if the person's possessed, you can beat him to the surface and force him to talk, and he'll talk. And then at that point, they'll, if the person was cursed, you have to break the curse, and that's going to be how you're going to liberate them. And so as a result, the demon's going to have to tell you at some point who cursed them and how it was done. And then there's usually specific things that you can do to invert those or break the curses.
How many demons are there?
Billions, literally. So when God created all the angels, he created the entire hierarchy of angels instantaneously all at once. And so starting from the seraphim, which is at the top, all the way down to just angels at the bottom. Of the class of the angels alone, there's one subset, which is the guardian angels. And every human being that has reached, that has basically been born or basically been conceived has had a guardian angel created specifically for that particular individual. So you're talking billions just in that one subclass. The number of angels that fell is from Book of Revelation, where Satan took a third of the stars and with his tail and swept them down. So that's, the fathers say that means that a third of the angels actually fell. Now, not a third get to possess or have much to do with us in this life. Most of the possessions that we see are from the top rank, which is the top 3 choirs, the thrones, the cherubim, and the seraphim. So, it'd be Satan, Lucifer, and Beelzebub, but there would also be Baal, Asmodeus, Leviathan, Lilith, Baphomet, and then also Moloch. Those are the ones in the middle. There's also other ones like Abaddon, who are kind of in the middle. You don't see too many in the middle tier very often. And then you'll see a lot of the lower grunt guys at the bottom, whose job is to just kind of do the bidding of the guys at the top. And so those are where you see most of the possessed and demons coming from.
And so when they name themselves, is this all recorded? I mean, when you're talking about billions of demons and you get one to name itself during an exorcism, you go do some research. I mean, how many times has it been where it wasn't recorded?
Most of it, actually.
Most of it.
Yeah, because historically, to be an exorcist was done by mentorship. So what would happen is if you were chosen to be an exorcist, you would go and study under some guy for like 1 year to 2 years, and then he would teach you all these things, that we're talking about. And so you would learn those things, and you'd learn the names of demons, and you'd see them in session and get a sense for them before you started out on your own. But because of the number of exorcists collapsed in the church, and then now they're just trying to get it back up off the ground. We teach classes, actually. My community and I, we actually teach classes, and then there's also a place in Mundelein that teaches courses on this particular topic. And so, but then we encourage people to come and sit on session, because it's one thing for me to tell you that, oh yeah, people change shape during session, and it's another thing to actually see it and see what you're actually looking at. So, because anytime demons preternaturally manifest, there's a real revelation, something about the demon. It's called the cause is always some way in the effect. It's a philosophical principle. The cause is always some way in the effect. And so they're revealing it. So when they do those types of things, those things don't, the only thing I'm really interested in is, what am I seeing? What can I learn from what is going on in this guy? Because that information is going to tell me something about him, and it's going to be helpful for me to get him out.
Before we move into shape-shifting and that kind of stuff, I'm just curious. So would that be your responsibility to record a new name with a new personality?
So we don't necessarily record it, but we are actually in the process of building a database. so that exorcists would have access to the database, because some of the common ones like Satan, Lucifer, and those things, or even some of the more common ones like Abaddon, who's the demon of destruction, you'll get you can find out a fair amount of information about these guys. We'll put those in the database, but there's a lot of ones that are less known, and so exorcists come across them. I've come across demons that other exorcists haven't. They've come across demons that I've never even heard of or nobody's ever even heard of. And it seems authentic, etc. So we want to get a database so that going forward, exorcists, if they come across somebody, they don't have to spend all the time doing the research. They can just quickly go take a look at the database and get a sense of, this is what the guy's weaknesses are. This is what he got out in these these cases. This is what got him out. This is his history. Because like the god of Isis or Osiris, those are Egyptian gods, but those are also demons. So if you know what those are, then you can actually don't have to go and read a bunch of Egyptian in order to know what these guys are.
Can a demon possess multiple people at one time?
Yeah, you can. I actually had a case of that. Well, two cases, where the same possessor was possessing two sisters who were blood related. And so when we would do sessions with one, the other one would manifest from time to time outside of the session.
Holy shit.
So we had to do a lot of stuff to keep them from what we call cross animation, which is where, when they're around each other, the demons are going to manifest. So you see that from time to time where someone who's possessed, they'll get around someone else who's possessed, and whoever has the lower demons in them will be the one where the lowest demon will manifest in the presence of the bigger demon. But they can possess more than one. They generally can only act on one thing at a time.
Okay.
But Thomas Aquinas says that they can act on a number of different things at the same time if it all falls under the same conceptual idea. So, for example, someone can juggle where they're keeping several things in the air at once. Demons can act on, like, I'm going to act on these three people that I'm possessing because I'm, my access to them is the same, and so they can act on three people at the same time. But normally they don't do that.
And it sounds like all of these demons were false gods at some point. You said a Norse god, Egyptian gods, Baal, Moloch.
Yeah. Not
Baphomet.
Yeah, so all the gods of the Gentiles are demons, which is true. I mean, the only ones I haven't come across are ones like for the Romans. Like I haven't come across Mars or Jupiter or something like that. But the Egyptian gods come across, several of those. The Norse ones are taking them. They're rising up because of they're being introduced or being used in video games and things of that sort that the young men are doing. So you're starting to see more of those. But not all the demons made themselves out to be a god to someone else. So Satan never really did, even though he wants people to worship him. He doesn't have a specific religion. He wants his own.
And they all fall under him.
They do, yeah.
What about Greek gods?
Yeah, it's the same. Some I've seen exorcists seeing, some we haven't. So, I suspect at some point some exorcist has come across, Venus or whatever, but we just don't hear about it too often.
And so when we get into, looking back through time, when we're talking about Norse gods, Baal, Moloch, Greek god, any gods that, throughout history, does that mean that those gods were introduced by a demon?
Very often. So what will happen is, historically, either the demon will possess somebody in a particular culture, and then from there, the person kind of becomes like this oracle from which the rituals and the worship is designed, and the people are swayed into doing it. You're not going to have a case where they're actually going to appear as a general rule, although that has happened historically, where demons will appear as angels of light and claim to be, from God, and then say this is what you're supposed to do, and getting the person to start their own religion. We've seen that happen a couple of times, actually. one in more modern history and one year 600. So we've seen those particular things happen.
What was the one in modern history?
The Mormons. So, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of the Mormons out there are not going to be happy that I said that, but the angel that appeared to him, it actually gets to the line from St. Paul, which is actually on the outside of the cathedral in Salt Lake, if I'm not mistaken, but out on the outside, it's, even if an angel were to preach to you another gospel. So you have those particular things that are actually, and the other thing is that, at least in the relationship with the Mormons, I don't want to get too deep into it, but that it's actually, it's a modified form of Freemasonry anyway.
I mean, that sounds like the ultimate deception. If they come to you in a light, to appear to be angelic, I mean, how does that look in God's eyes? Fall into that deception.
Well, God's allowing it, obviously, because they literally, like I said, the battlefield is completely determined by Christ. So Christ is allowing it. And I once asked this one colleague of mine, I said, well, what do you think is the reason for the Muslims? He said, to afflict the West. Right? So God will allow these particular things to afflict us in order for us to get our act together, but also to reveal to us that, look, if you start your own religion, it's just going to go bad and it's just not going to be true. So I think in God's eyes, I think that's part of it. But I think on the side of the human beings, we're just easily deceived. Because demons they can present themselves in a very positive light. Everywhere from anything from actually appearing as an angel of light, when people actually see this bright figure appear in front of them, all the way down to giving people amorous feelings, to where so the person says, "Oh, it must be from God because it's helping me to love people more." No, that's not necessarily the case.
Will we be judged for that? I mean, that it just sounds like the ultimate deception, almost, and he allowed it.
Yeah.
So can we be blamed if we're that? I mean, earlier you had mentioned, we're stupid. We are stupid.
We are stupid. On the other hand, we're not that stupid. So, what degree of deception, ultimately God would be able to judge the particular individual soul. So it might be possible that someone started their own religion not knowing that they were completely deceived. But my experience in reading about these people's history is there's often points that after they've had these experiences that it becomes clear to them, or they start having the thoughts, maybe I'm possessed, or maybe this isn't from God. And so they don't take the necessary steps to properly discern it.
As the video fades, let's sit with what we've just witnessed. A seasoned exorcist, calm and credible, looked us in the eyes and described encountering a man possessed by 27 demons, not in some ancient text or Hollywood script, but in our modern world. One human being carrying that level of darkness, and yet, through faith, ritual, persistence, and compassion, liberation was possible. What does this mean for you and me? First, recognize that the spiritual realm is not distant or metaphorical. It is active, intelligent, and interacts with the wounds we carry. Trauma, repeated sin, occult involvement, curses, or even seemingly innocent doorways like certain spiritual practices can create openings. The Exorcist made it clear. Most possessions begin with pain left unhealed and doors left unguarded. But here is the empowering truth. Knowledge is your first defense. Understanding that demons have names, hierarchies, and strategies gives you authority through awareness. When you know how they enter, you can better guard the gates of your mind, heart, and home. The name holds power, not just for the exorcist, but for every believer who calls upon the name above every name. Second, mental and spiritual health are deeply intertwined. Many cases the exorcist described began with severe trauma, abuse, or despair. If you are struggling with intrusive thoughts, overwhelming fear, addiction, or a sense of being trapped, do not ignore the possibility of layered causes. Seek professional counseling, build a strong support system, and simultaneously nurture your spirit. True freedom often requires both therapy and prayer, science and faith working together. Third, the power of renunciation and repentance is real. Every time the exorcist forced a demon to reveal its entry point, healing accelerated. Ask yourself honestly, what have I opened myself to through media, relationships, anger, unforgiveness, or pride that I now need to close? Write it down. Speak it out. Renounce it with authority. Replace it with light. Fourth, community and mentorship matter. The Exorcist emphasized learning through experience, under guidance rather than going alone. Surround yourself with people of genuine faith, accountability, and wisdom. Isolation is the enemy's favorite battlefield. Connection is your fortress. Fifth, and most importantly, hope is not naive, it is strategic. Even with 27 demons, that man was not beyond redemption. The same divine authority that created the universe is available to every person who turns toward it. The Exorcist's work reminds us that darkness, no matter how deep, is not infinite. Light is. So here is my challenge to you after watching this. Tonight, before you sleep, perform a simple spiritual inventory. Walk through your home and pray for protection over every room. Renounce anything that does not serve your highest good. Replace fear with faith. Replace curiosity about the dark with pursuit of the light. If you are battling something heavy right now, anxiety that feels demonic in its persistence, addictions that defy logic, or a darkness you cannot name, know you are not alone and you are not powerless. Reach out for help. Find a trusted pastor, counselor, or deliverance ministry. Start small. One honest prayer. One brave confession. One act of surrender. The spiritual battle is real, but so is victory. The same God who allowed the Exorcist to face 27 demons also gave him the tools, the faith, and the authority to see freedom manifest. That same power is at work today. You were never meant to live tormented, anxious, or enslaved. You were created for freedom, purpose, and peace that surpasses understanding. Close this video not with fear, but with resolve. Let today mark the beginning of deeper discernment, stronger boundaries, and bolder faith. Guard your heart. Renew your mind. Walk in the light. And remember, the darkness only feels overwhelming until you turn on the light. Once that light is on, no number of shadows can withstand it. Thank you for watching with an open mind and a courageous heart. If this message stirred something in you, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe for more real conversations at the edge of faith and human experience. Until next time, stand firm, stay watchful, and walk in victory. You've got this. The best is yet to come.